Hey everybody, I'm here with Russel Sveda, and he's going to go on ahead and introduce himself. He has a very expansive history. He's a very worldly man, quite the Renaissance man as well. And we're going to go on ahead and discuss a few relevant news articles, and he's going to give his personal expertise. And Russell, why don't you go on ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself, where you come from, your journey, and your professional career over the years.
Well, I'm originally from New Jersey, a state that's about the size of Israel, which we'll get to later. And I was born there and um, joined the Foreign Service. And make a long story short, I joined the Foreign Service and I had a career as a Foreign Service officer, which is to say, as a U.S. diplomat.
And what year was that around?
Well, 1975 to 2015 or so.
So you were in Russia?
Originally I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Korea when it was a poor country.
Mm-hmm.
Peace Corps is sort of the junior foreign service. So a lot of my fellow Peace Corps volunteers in Korea joined the Foreign Service. I mean, how many people are you going to find in America who speak Korean, at least at that time? Very, very.
And you were in the Peace Corps in what year? Was this before Korea had been divided or after?
No. Korea was divided in 1945.
Right. Okay. So well after. Right.
Yeah, it was well after that. But it was well after the Korean War, which ended in 1953. I was there in 1967.
So you mean South Korea?
South Korea, yeah.
Okay. Good. I just wanted to clarify there.
Although briefly, I was in North Korea in the sense that I stepped into the North Korean zone at the Treaty Village of Panmunjom.
Really?
Yeah, I did that when I was a Peace Corps volunteer and later when I was there with the embassy. But basically, my career was that I went to the State Department after law school and a master's in international affairs at Columbia. And I went to, of course, Korea was my first post. We almost got into a war with North Korea at that time. Gerald Ford was president long before you were born, and was in a battle with Ronald Reagan to get the nomination in 1976 of the Republican Party. That's another story, but basically I went to Korea and then I went to the Sinai Desert in between the Egyptian army and the Israeli army. And that was during the Camp David negotiations, which Jimmy Carter conducted.
In what capacity were you in Egypt?
I was there as a what did we call ourselves?
Were you still working with the State Department?
Oh, yeah. I was with the State Department. We called ourselves, what do we call ourselves? I guess we were handling the treaty between, not treaty, but we were handling the truce between Egypt and Israel at that time.
What year?
This was 1978 to 81. Excuse me. And then I went to the State Department and I wrote the intelligence briefings for the president. And then Ronald Reagan came in as president. And I studied Russian and I went to Russia with the embassy there. I was the science officer, although I really have no background in science. It's a happy accident that I was assigned there. And I was sort of the X-Files person there. I was looking at what the Soviets were then doing with parapsychology. Parapsychology being things like distance viewing, telekinesis, psychic projection.
Really?
Yeah, sure.
Wow. Okay.
And the Russians are probably still doing this kind of research. We were doing it for a while, and it was written up in a book called The Men Who Stare at Goats, which was made into a film which had nothing whatsoever to do with the book except in the broadest themes. The book is very, very interesting and very, very detailed and very, very accurate, and I was shocked when I read it.
And who is the author?
Oh, I forget the name of the author right now. Men Who Stare at Goats.
Men Who Stare at Goats. I think I've heard of that.
Yeah, well, it was made into a film, and the film was made with top stars. Ewan McGregor, Kevin Spacey.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, that's firing some neural cortexes there.
Yeah.
Okay,
And
so
that's basically what I was doing in Russia. And then I went back, worked on the China desk. Ronald Reagan was president, and we were trying to push, we, meaning the Reagan administration,
right.
was trying to push China into a more open relationship with the United States. The Carter administration had tried to do that too. You know, the State Department is apolitical. You serve anybody who happens to be president. But Ronald Reagan had been governor of California, and he was very, very pro-trade with China, extraordinarily interested in that.
Being on the West Coast and whatnot.
Yeah, being on the West Coast. And then I worked in China, and then I worked with the National Science Foundation on international research programs that we had with the Soviet Union and then the former Soviet Union and all the former Soviet countries, and then with China. It really became quite a grab bag of stuff. That's basically my career.
So
I also worked for 8 years in the Clinton White House, in the White House press section.
8 years in the Clinton administration in the press section?
White House press section, you know, in that whole mix.
Wow, okay. Did you, so were you there for the "I did not have sexual relations with that woman" speech?
Yeah, well, I went to school with Bill Clinton, so it was a lot of fun.
Wow, that's awesome.
My classmate become president. You know, it was like in 91, he never expected to become president in 1991 when he announced. Never expected to get the presidential nomination. Everybody expected that it would be Mario Cuomo, who was then governor of New York, who would get the Democratic nomination. And nobody knew why Cuomo couldn't decide whether to run or not. And there was a guy who was governor of Virginia. He was the first black governor, and his name was Wilder. And he decided to run for president. And by his running for president in 91, he knocked out Jesse Jackson's candidacy because, hey, there was a Democratic governor who was a black man who was running for president, so Jesse Jackson was going to run as the black candidate and divide that. And then Mario Cuomo decided at the last minute not to run for reasons that I will give you in a second, which are not generally known. And all the black support went to, of all people, Bill Clinton, because Wilder then also decided not to run. So basically it was Clinton's practically for the asking.
Do you think that's what the female Clinton was hoping would happen last election?
Last election is something else, but what Bill Clinton was expecting from 1992, because George H.W. Bush was so enormously popular, what he was expecting was that he would get the vice presidential nomination under Mario Cuomo.
Right.
He would lose, but he would look good as a vice presidential nomination, and in 1996, he would run for president when George H.W. Bush was not running. That was his plan. But what messed this up was Mario Cuomo decided not to run. Why did Mario Cuomo decide not to run? It's very simple. He couldn't sleep in any bed except his own next to his wife.
Really?
I mean, that is the craziest reason that you could imagine in American politics.
You can't bring your wife into the White House to sleep in the same bed?
no, you can't campaign for president if you have to go back to Albany, New York each night and sleep with your wife.
Oh, there we go. Yep, that'll do it. Wow.
That was the reason.
And I thought that the what was it, the Duke of York or something? Who was the English royalty who had the speech impediment? They made a movie about it, King's Speech.
Yeah, it was George the Sixth.
Yeah, I thought his problem was bad.
Yeah,
Imagine.
no, all of these people, the thing about all of these people is that, like anybody else, they may have their skill set. Somebody may be a doctor, somebody may be a dentist, somebody may, um, be in business, somebody may be president of the United States or whatever. But aside from their skill set, they really are human beings,
Right.
just like anybody else.
Right.
And so if anybody says, well, I was Senator so-and-so, therefore, my opinion on dental hygiene is more important than anybody else's. No, I'm sorry. If you were a dentist, maybe, but not if you were a senator. Same thing if you were a dentist, well, I'm a dentist, so therefore my opinion on politics. No, sorry. Your opinion on dental hygiene is good, but we don't know. Maybe you're good about politics, maybe not. We don't know.
So do you not feel as though there should be more scientists in politics, regardless of the field?
Well, absolutely, there should be more scientists in politics, but real scientists get real grants and they want to do science.
They're not interested in politics.
They're just not interested.
Right, right. Well, I've been seeing over the last 3-4 years a recent upsurge in scientists running for politics, and I mean even Ben Carson. He's a neurosurgeon, or he's a brain surgeon, and that's basically what he ran his campaign on. He ran for president, uh, trying to tout that a a scientist or a doctor would be more qualified to run the country. And there is that argument, but honestly, I personally feel that it's not necessarily that we need more scientists; it's that we need more scientifically literate people.
Absolutely. 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 I mean, I'm not a scientist, but I am scientifically literate. I want to put it that way.
Right.
And I'm very interested in science. I mean, I have to be. I mean, my whole career somehow has been involved in it.
Well,
Um,
I think science is universal. There's not a single thing that you can do that you can't somehow twist into a lesson about science or an application of science.
yeah, and also scientists, God bless them, respect facts, unless they happen to be the senator from Kentucky, um, the Rand Paul, Senator Rand Paul, who is a ophthalmologist, but seems to have no regard for facts whatsoever.
In what sense?
In the sense that he just doesn't seem to realize that. Well, we can get into the current affairs right now. For example, he goes over to the White House and he asks for several people to lose their security clearances yesterday. And never mind the fact that two of them didn't have security clearances. He's kind of sloppy about details, and the scientists should not be sloppy about details.
Yeah, well, I can agree with you there. I'm not too sure. I think I might have heard something about that, but the question that your comment brings to mind most is, were the two people that he put on the list that did not have security clearance, were they still getting access to the information that would have required a security clearance, and that's
No,
why he requested that that they have a security clearance removed, or was that just him being sloppy and naming people
it
that
was
had?
clearly sloppiness because the two people were former FBI Director Comey and his assistant, Mr. McCabe,
Mhm.
and neither of them had security clearances.
So why would he have asked obviously the reason why you would ask to get somebody's security clearance revoked, I mean, even I think Kushner had his security clearance not revoked, but reduced because of certain allegations or whatnot. I'm not an expert in politics. But you have to have some kind of reason. You have to have spilled some beans somewhere you shouldn't in order to, in order to bring to light the fact that you need a security clearance for votes. So what do you know?
What was really going on?
Yeah, do you know
But
what it was that
what was really going on was that Trump is, well, first of all, what was really going on is that this Senator Rand Paul, has a particular problem with former CIA Director Brennan. But putting that aside and putting his political disagreements aside, when he presented that to President Trump, Trump was incensed that these guys were showing up on CNN and MSNBC and other channels and making money.
Right.
And Trump doesn't like anybody making money off of Trump.
Well, the media's been doing that for the last 3 years now.
And who hates the media the most?
Trump. That's smart.
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go.
He regards this as a business, and his name, when he sees his name on books that he's not getting money from, Comey's book, for example,
Right.
when he sees his name on other books that other people are getting money from, he feels he's being robbed. He's angry.
Right.
He has a very unusual view of the world.
Let me just say, as a counter to that, one would say that part of what won Trump the election was all the media attention. I mean, he got so much free advertising just because of all the publicity that was based around his campaign, and he didn't have to pay a dime to those news networks. And everybody in America was talking about him. So, does he really hate it, or is he just blustering and putting on a show in the same way that he does in other things?
I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine.
Well, speaking of Donald Trump blustering and putting on a show, let's go on ahead and dive into what was supposed to be our third story. But we'll go on ahead and talk about the first story. And I'll be putting the links to all of these news articles that caught my attention down below in the comments section. Feel free to go on ahead and check out those yourself. The first one is from NPR, and it's about potentially a war with Iran. Nothing big. So according to NPR, there was some distressing communications between Donald Trump and the president of Iran. The Iranian President Rouhani cautioned U.S. President Donald Trump in a meeting attended by the Iranian representatives in foreign countries. They said, don't play with the lion's tail or you will regret it. And he warned that America should know that peace with Iran is the mother of all peace, and war with Iran is the mother of all wars. To which our glorious leader promptly replied via Twitter, of all things, to Iranian President Rouhani, never, ever threaten the United States again, or you will suffer the consequences, the likes of which few throughout history have ever suffered before. We are no longer a country that will stand for your demented words of violence and death. Be cautious. So that's fun. In response, Democrats of the House of Foreign Affairs Committee tweeted a retort saying, don't be distracted by all caps. We're not attacking Iran. And there's been some other responses, obviously. And so I'd just like to get a couple things from you on that end. One, first question being, when is somebody going to turn off this man's Twitter account?
That's really the question, isn't it?
Right. But seriously though, do you think that foreign affairs or American social affairs, the firing of staff, for instance, or the declaration of or threats of war, obviously with the North Korea situation, this isn't the first time that our president has issued a threat to another nation via a social media platform. Do you think that's, I doubt you think that's appropriate, but what do you think about all this?
Well, first of all, let's take the Iran situation. Iran's in a very, 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 very strategic position.
Hmm.
If you look at a map, the Straits of Hormuz are like a clamshell, and the clamshell opens and shuts at these straits. And within the clam is all the oil of the Middle East.
Right.
I didn't say some. I said oil. I said all.
Well, right, right.
So the Saudi oil, the oil from the Arab Emirates, Qatar, from Kuwait, from Iran, all passes through this narrow passage, which is bordered on the north by Iran.
So
They
they
could,
basically got control of that shipping.
yeah.
So
So, so
if
here
we
you
were
are.
to get into war,
You're China, you're Japan, you're Korea, you're India, you're Egypt,
Taiwan, the Philippines,
just name it, just about anybody.
hell,
And
Australia.
you may get your oil from Indonesia if you're lucky, but most are going to get the bulk of their oil from this region, the Gulf region.
Right.
And while we're not going to be directly affected, our prices are certainly going to be affected, because guess who's going to go after the Indonesian oil? The Indonesian oil is sweet oil.
Hmm.
The oil we get from Venezuela, and well, if we were to get Venezuelan oil, but that's another story. But the oil we get from, say, Canada or from the United States is dirty oil. And it has to be refined in a certain way to get rid of the sulfur.
Gotcha.
Indonesian oil doesn't. So we buy the Indonesian oil, using it in our refineries, and we sell our stuff to the Chinese and others. Prices of oil are going to go up,
Right.
obviously, and really up if there's a problem with Iran. So it does, it's a real threat. But let's go back for a second. Trump threatened fire and fury against Iran.
Right.
Fire and
Now this.
fury. Fire and fury. Where have we heard that phrase before?
Sounds awful biblical to me.
Well, it's after the Bible, it's certainly North Korea in the last few months. Fire and fury, fire and fury. So what happens? Trump says fire and fury to North Korea and winds up giving them a photo op and ending U.S. military operations with the South Koreans, exercises in South Korea which are necessary for the defense of South Korea. So North Korea gets everything, South Korea gets nothing, we get nothing, and Trump goes home with a photo op. So here you are, you're sitting in Iran, and what has happened over the weekend? Your lucky day. The president has promised you fire and fury. Nothing bad can come from this. They've given you attention, and they are probably going to roll over and play dead the way Trump usually handles foreign policy matters.
So do you basically see every
Oh,
act
excuse me. And one other thing. This would not have been Trump's reaction had it not been for the fact that all of this stuff is coming out about the money he paid to this Playboy model McDougal, coming out with Cohen tapes. Anytime that there is a change in the Mueller investigation, or the Stormy Daniels, or now the McDougal affair,
any one of his scandals.
any one of those scandals, Trump responds with something in foreign policy. We saw that with North Korea, for example.
So you see a direct correlation between events in that way.
Not only I, but just about everybody who analyzes this in Washington does.
Okay. So do you feel like in the same way that Donald Trump got elected because of negative publicity and capitalized off of that, and is still capitalizing off of his negative publicity, that in a sense all the other nations around the world right now are capitalizing on his negative publicity?
Well, our allies are certainly looking around for somebody other than the United States to give them security.
Mm. So you see the world moving on without America in a way that America didn't necessarily think was possible.
Correct.
Gotcha. Okay, so do you, another question about the war, potential war in Iran. Do you, obviously, I'm a little bit stuck on the social media thing. Would you compare any of the, Twitter battles between our elected leaders to be similar to like a second sort of Cuban Missile Crisis, except it's being done emotionally and electronically under with within the parameters of 140 characters? Do you see it being that severe?
No, we're not at a Cuban Missile Crisis level because the United States has already surrendered to the Soviet Union, to Russia,
Mm.
to Putin. Soviet, call it Soviet Union, call it Russia. Yeah, it's Russia. It's not the Soviet Union, but the strategy is the same. The strategy is to disrupt NATO, to disrupt the European Union, to disrupt the relationship of the United States with its allies, and get within the United States and turn Americans against one another. I mean,
In a
that's the
sense,
Russian view of the world. That's the way the Russians act.
right.
That's the way they acted when they were Soviets. That's the way they acted when they were Tsarists. Nothing has changed.
So we'll get into that in just a little bit. That's actually our next news article. But one last question on the Iran story. What do you see a war with Iran actually looking like if we were to go to war in Iran, given what's been going on in Iraq and Afghanistan over the last, well over the last decade, almost 2 decades?
Well, if you're planning a war with Iran, the first question is who is for Iran and who is against Iran, who is with the United States and who is against the United States.
Definitely.
Uh, the Russians may well back Iran.
Mm.
It's possible. They're already developing a very friendly relationship with Iran in Syria.
Yeah, especially with Syria right now.
Yeah, in Syria and in Lebanon and all. The Russians want to have a foothold in the Middle East, and
And in
their bet.
Africa?
Pardon me?
And in Africa?
Oh yeah, of course. In Africa, they want a foothold everywhere.
Gotcha.
They want back. They want to have their Russian Empire back.
So that's their ultimate goal, you feel?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, all right. So on that note, let's go on ahead and start talking about, this is a little old, I know, but let's just briefly go over the whole Helsinki summit. I'm going to post a link to a very informative breakdown from ABC News. I'll go on ahead and post that down below so you guys can check that out. But in the meanwhile, Russell, why don't you go on ahead and break down the summit from your personal standpoint, given your vast expertise?
Well, I worked in Russia. I worked in the Soviet Union, and I speak Russian, and I have studied Russia for years before I went to Russia. I know people who know Putin, and I've dealt with the KGB. Almost everybody has who's been in Russia, whether they know it or not. And Putin is, and Putin is, of course, a KGB officer. They call it the FSB now. Let's call it what it was. Everybody recognizes the KGB initials. They know what that means. He is a wily and ruthless dictator. He kills people he does not like, and he does whatever he likes on the international scene, claiming always that Russia is the victim of some sort of conspiracy some sort of bad publicity. Uh, for example, complaining that the shoot down 4 years ago of the Malaysian jet was actually done by a Ukrainian plane, according to Pedro, a Spanish air traffic controller somewhere in Europe. This Pedro has never been identified, but
Right.
but he keeps repeating it the way Trump keeps repeating
Witch hunt
his,
thing.
his own fantasies about things.
Right.
Putin's bad news.
So, as far as the whole Helsinki Summit goes, I assume you observed it and you.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and like everybody else, we know nothing about what went on from the American side. We know everything that we know that went on from the Russian side. The Russians are happily saying, well, in Helsinki, the American president agreed to this, that, and the other thing.
Hmm.
And American policymakers, including our Secretary of State, including our National Security Council head and all those other people, have no idea what went on because Trump was in there alone and there was nobody taking notes.
Yeah, for 2 hours apparently. Before the press conference, they went into a briefing room, and it was apparently just Trump, Putin, and two translators, and those were the only people in the room for 2 hours. And then immediately following that, they walked right up onto the press conference floor. Trump had no debriefing of the conversation with any of his advisors or any of his security, and they immediately took questions. Um, what do you think the implications are of that, given Trump's performance when asked about when basically prompted by media to stand up for America and not to take not to take Putin's instructions and to actually stand up and be a firm leader in that
It was the
regard.
most disgraceful event in the history of American diplomacy.
Yeah, I heard one of Trump's own advisors said that. I think another State Department member, I forget who. But do
It was treason.
you think it was as far as that?
It was giving aid and comfort to the enemy, or should we say to an adversary. There's no question that Russia is an adversary.
So you've never seen any kind of president behave in that way? Because right now
Never.
his advocates, those that still defend him at this point, are saying that in order to maintain a healthy dialogue, which is important to an eventual lasting peace with Russia, that you need to be accommodating and obsequious, or in a sense.
Ronald Reagan was not in the slightest without a spine. He had a very tough spine when it came to Russia. Jimmy Carter did, Eisenhower did, Lyndon Johnson did, Nixon did, Ford did. I'm just doing them out of order.
Right, but
Harry
not just
Truman
with Russia,
did.
though, but with any American president regarding any relations with any nation. Have you ever heard or seen of anything like this before?
No,
So this is definitely a first in American history.
yes.
Wow.
It's the absolute low point of American diplomacy.
So how do you feel about the reaction by the United States government to our president's display? Do you feel like it's warranted? Do you feel like it's not a strong enough reaction? How do you feel about it?
All you had to do was look at the body language. Putin was smirking. He was laughing to himself. He couldn't stop laughing at one point.
Yeah, I saw that.
And Trump looked like he had just had all the like he had lost all the money at the casino. He just looked terrible. He looked very unhappy.
Yeah.
I mean, he goes to the casino, he loses everything. The only thing he gets is a soccer ball.
That's funny.
And he tosses that to his wife. That's, is really kind of funny.
Yeah, no, he did actually do that. That's so. Given the press in Russia, how do you do you feel like they're also going to spin the whole summit in the same way that the Korean media spinned, or the North Korean media spinned Trump's meeting with their leader?
Well, of course, the Russians are crowing about this. The Russians, the only thing that the Russians are worried about is that this is some sort of a devilish trap, some sort of an insidious trap that they cannot figure out.
Right? They're like, no, he can't be that stupid. He can't be that weak. It has to be
Exactly.
some trick.
Exactly.
Wow.
It's just like, wow, let's hold back for a second. This is, something's really
Right?
strange.
There's no way he just softball it in there for us like that.
Exactly.
Wow.
Exactly.
So, how do you feel like the rest of the world? Obviously, we're an embarrassment in many areas, but just so our viewers know, Russell has a cold. He doesn't do that
Yeah.
recreationally.
No, this is
Sorry, I forgot to let our audience know before we started the show. So how do you feel like after Helsinki? How do you feel like we appear on the world stage now as a nation, not just about our president? Given our government's reaction and given our population's reaction to our own president's performance, do you still feel like we saved a little bit of face with our own media's reaction, or do you think that we're even more now the laughing stock of the world?
we're the laughing stock of the world.
Well, that's it's a pretty
It's very
succinct
simple. I
answer.
mean, you give me a country. I mean, people are scared. Take
Right.
Estonia, Latvia. They're scared because
Don't we support them?
Trump said last week he was interviewing Tucker Carlson, whose wife once hid her dogs in my kitchen from the cops who were tagging dogs that were not on leashes. But that's another matter.
Wow, okay.
Um, but
You'll have to
the
tell me about that.
yeah, I was surprised.
So,
I'm allergic to dogs. So, but what happened was Tucker Carlson asked why his son, who's in the military apparently, should die for Montenegro, which is a new member of NATO, which, by the way, Trump admitted to NATO. He signed on Trump on Montenegro coming in. Montenegro is a small country. It has 600,000 people, and it's part of the former Yugoslavia. It's just picking up the pieces down there.
okay.
Trump gets this weird idea that Montenegro could start World War III. And why should we be involved in World War III if Montenegro starts it? Well, he doesn't understand the first thing about the NATO treaty. We don't defend anybody who starts a war. We defend people who are attacked.
Right.
That's it. And so if Montenegro is attacked, we're attacked. If Lithuania, if Latvia, if Estonia are attacked, if Poland is attacked, if Hungary is attacked, and so forth, we are attacked. And this gives us all strength in numbers. There are 28 members of NATO. And the only time the NATO treaty was ever invoked was after 9/11, when the Europeans came to our defense and served in Afghanistan. There are
Right.
troops from Montenegro now in Afghanistan,
All because of 9/11.
all because of 9/11. That's the only time the NATO treaty has ever been used.
Wow. That's, I mean, given the importance of these multinational organizations, I find that to be a very interesting fact.
Yeah, and
That
let's look at world history for a second. What happened in World War One? World War One, Germany tries to take over all of Europe.
Right.
because of this fight, because of the divisions in Europe, we intervene, we really do make a difference, and we basically lose a lot of soldiers, but we guarantee that Europe will not be ruled by Kaiser's Germany.
Right.
A few years later, World War II occurs. The divisions of Europe calls us to come in and lose even more soldiers, fight even harder against Nazism.
Mm-hmm.
Then what happens? The Cold War.
Right.
For 60, 70 years, whatever it is, 50 years, we're fighting the Cold War against the Soviet Union and its puppets. Why? To keep Europe safe from being invaded because of the divisions of Europe. What do we want overall? What do we want for the next century? We want Europe to be united.
Right.
In fact, I would love it if the Russians joined a united Europe and stop all this nonsense. Because, frankly, Russia, with its population of 142 million, Putin says 146, Russia, with a declining population of 146 million, either has a choice of joining Europe's 450 million or being taken over by China. China wants Russia's resources in Siberia.
You think that's possible or feasible?
Possible, feasible, it's happening as we're sitting here.
Well,
The Chinese have tens of thousands of workers in Siberia.
Right. But that's just
Guest
an
workers.
immigration thing. Those aren't soldiers.
Yeah, the Chinese aren't leaving. The Chinese have never left anywhere they've gone. That's 4,000 years, you know.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'd say that's a fairly solid statement to stand on. It definitely raises a lot of questions. So let's get to we're finishing up the hour here. Let's get to the very last story. We're sailing the boat back on home, and we're going to talk about immigration a little bit. Now, Russell, I know this is not necessarily your area of expertise, but I'm sure living in all the places that you've lived and experiencing all the government policies of different nations, I'm sure you can offer a lot to the opinion here. But according to NPR, the HHS has 3,000 more immigrant children that are separated from parents in custody, and a federal judge from, I think, San Diego has issued a court order demanding that the United States government reunite these children by the end of next month.
Which
Now,
the U.S. government can't do because the idiots didn't think of anything as simple as putting a hospital bracelet on these kids.
right. And we've got ankle monitors and all this other technology.
Ankle monitors, hospital bracelet. You don't go into a hospital without getting a bracelet with your name, your date of birth, and other data there.
Right. So real quick, the article from NPR showed that since the Trump administration has enforced its zero tolerance policy, immigration, both legal and illegal, across the the southern United States border has dropped by 18%. So the couple questions here. One, obviously, these laws were not put into place during the Trump administration. These are laws that have been around since before the Obama administration. They just simply weren't enforced in the same way or to the same effect that the Trump administration is now enforcing them. So, I mean, I'm correct in that statement that these were Obama-era rules, and if I am correct, why do you think that they're being enforced now, even though they were on the books?
Racism.
Before? Racism?
Yeah, in a word, racism. Look, we have to have borders like any country. We have to have control over borders like any country.
Okay.
But when people are fleeing for their lives, I mean, quite literally for their lives,
Yeah, either
Every
from
country,
gangs or economic poverty. Yeah.
when they're fleeing for their lives, when they're being threatened at gunpoint, literally, um, like people from Guatemala, Nicaragua, and El Salvador are being done right now. I mean, even
Honduras.
Honduras, the whole place down there is a mess. We, like every other country, accept people who are seeking asylum, and there's an orderly process for that. But let's overlook that program right now and the problems attendant to it.
Mm-hmm.
Let's look at the needs of U.S. industry. Have you gone to a dairy farm recently? I haven't, but I
I've
understand.
seen the documentaries. You can't find a single pale colored person working those machines.
Yeah, who's going to go there? Have you gone to a slaughterhouse recently?
Nope. But I can guess it's the exact same thing. And any kind of cornfield or soybean field, I'm sure it's the same thing. Obviously, these immigration makes up for most of our agricultural labor, most of our construction labor, and a good portion of our hospitality industry as well. Um,
You got it.
but these like ICE wasn't an institution 50 years ago, and we've been running on immigrant power since this nation was founded. Except we just used to call it slavery. Um, so
All,
so
all four of my grandparents were immigrants.
exactly. So if it wasn't the Africans that were brought over inhumanely, it was the Chinese on the railroads. It was the
Mm.
Italians in the factories. It was the Irish in the construction industry in New England. So we
Oh,
have
yeah.
we have a history of this, but we don't really have a history of an institution like ICE. So what are your thoughts and opinions on ICE as an institution? Do you feel it's constitutional? Do you feel it's legal? Do you feel it's ethical? How do you feel like it compares to the rest of the anti-immigration agencies that are in other nations around the world?
Well, it was set up, as I understand it, it was set up after 911, basically to handle certain touchy immigration and customs questions for the national security of the United States. And
Such
that was,
as?
well, I mean, people are coming in with false passports. We were trying to shut the door after 911.
So strictly for illegal immigration.
It was for the kind of illegal immigration that is apt to do damage to the United States.
So not even just illegal immigration, only harmful illegal immigration. You're saying that the
And that was
institution.
basically my understanding. That would be harmful to the United States.
So you're saying.
And if they kept to that, yeah, sure, fine. Why not? But they have had the definition of what is harmful to the United States has changed rather radically, to include mothers with 6-week-old infants
Right, or 5-year-old children,
or
or
5-year-old
what
children.
have you.
I mean,
So
that's wrong. That's wrong.
yeah,
Now,
and
is it the problem of the agency itself, or is it the problem of the policies of the agency? I don't know. That's something to sort out. I think it's a mistake to go after the agency itself because that just hands the Republicans an issue. There may be some valid reason for having the agency there. Instead of having 5,000 people, maybe you can have 50. I don't know.
so you don't feel like it's the you don't really feel like ICE should be abolished necessarily. You just feel like it should go through rigorous
I
restructuring.
mean, if the Democrats were to come in tomorrow, I think it would go through radical restructuring. I mean, if you don't like an agency, you just reduce it from 500 people to 50, and maybe to 5. You don't have to fill the agency with people. Um, if it serves some purpose, if it doesn't serve any purpose, get rid of it.
Right. I guess that makes sense. But it is being served as a purpose in some sense because the NPR post showed that immigration was down 18% just since the Trump administration has taken over and installed its zero tolerance policy. So we've been able to see, we
Yeah, but that trend was going under Obama, you know, and you mentioned the Obama policies.
okay, that's fair. But but those, the the rate by which it was decreasing, I'm sure, wasn't that fast during the Obama administration. And I know there's clips of Obama saying we're going to put more boots on the ground at the border than ever before, and that he did put a lot of money into enforcing and tightening up the borders. But in the same sense, that 18%, that's a big number in less than 2 years. And I mean, let's just talk about the children. Psychologically speaking, separating a child from his parents, mother or father, is psychologically damaging, and keeping these kids in those conditions, even when they get reunited with their families, if they get reunited with their families. Um, every single documentary and interview I've seen of news organizations interviewing these women and families and parents have said that they're going to need to put their children through therapy, because their children just, they come back and they're reunited with their parents, but they're not the same people. They're extremely psychologically damaged. They've got severe traumatic issues from the experience, and they're going back home.
When I was 5 years old, my um, mother was prevailed upon by one of my uncles to send me to a summer camp with two of my older cousins. They were like 7 and 8.
You were 5.
I was 5.
Okay.
And I was far, far, far too young to go to the summer camp. I was treated very, very badly. Here it is, many years later, I still bear the trauma from that 2-week separation.
Summer camp, not even internment camp.
Right.
You were there. The entire structure of the camp, I assume, was designed with your fun and happiness and well-being in mind, correct?
Correct.
So we can only imagine what these kids come out. Wow. Okay. So I mean, obviously that's the
It's obviously an
families.
issue I feel strongly about.
Other countries in Honduras and El Salvador and wherever all these South American immigrants are coming from, because I'm sure it's not just those countries, they have access to the internet. You know, they can hear these stories. They hear about these children, and they get scared. And so one could say that this is actually a successful deterrent of immigration. Would you feel that that's accurate? Is it deterring immigration? Doing that to these families and these children?
Well, we have two kinds of immigration. We have people who are coming for economic reasons, and they should go through the orderly process for that.
Mm-hmm.
And we have people who are coming for asylum,
Right.
because they have a very real threat of being killed. And it has to be very real, and it has to be, you know, very immediate.
Right. See, the thing is, and I don't mean to cut you off here, but and in one of the documentaries I watched, it was from Vice News, and I can add it in the comments so you guys can watch it as well. The parent, the father that they'd interviewed, who was being reunited with their child, he came to the border and went through the legal process of seeking asylum, and he was still detained and separated from his family. So even the people who are coming in legally, who are not trying to hop borders and just getting picked up by ICE or Border Patrol, even people who are coming through legally are getting this treatment. So
Let's be frank about this. Let's be frank about this. This is all the policies enunciated by White House aide Stephen Miller, who is anti-immigrant in any form,
Okay.
who has a very big hold on Trump. I think he's, what, I don't know, 30, 32 or something like that. He is the guy who doesn't want anybody coming in. These policies are there to terrify people. These are terror policies.
So it is a scare tactic.
Yeah,
It is.
period.
Do you feel like it's a form of, and I don't know if there's any actual definition of this, but do you feel like it's a form of diplomatic or national terrorism?
Well, it's certainly a violation of international law if we don't accept, if we don't interrogate at least asylum seekers, or we don't treat them fairly. I mean, that is a violation of international law just on the face of it. As far as the rights of people to immigrate, when I was a new Foreign Service officer, I was assigned to Korea because I had been there in Peace Corps and I spoke Korean.
Right.
And one of my assignments for at least a year was visas. And I would think that of the 2 million people, 2 million Koreans in Los Angeles right now, many of them have my name on their papers.
So you were distributing visas?
Well, I was distributing visas according to our law. But our law was very, 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 very frustrating.
In what sense?
What would happen was a GI would meet a girl,
okay,
Korean,
okay,
and they would get married.
Right. I assume that happened a lot.
Yes. We're talking about 100 a day at least.
Wow.
And they would come to my office and we would certify that they had been married.
Okay.
And then the new Mrs. Whatever would get on an airplane and fly to Guam the next day, where they would become American citizens. Why? Because they were the wives, they were the families of American soldiers stationed in a war zone.
And so that granted them special diplomatic.
That granted them a special, instead of waiting 6 years to become a citizen, they became citizens in one day.
Right, yeah.
They came back the second day with a stack of visa applications for their brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers, uncles,
aunts. Man. Wow.
So while in let's say 1970, we maybe had 150 Koreans in Los Angeles, we now have something like 2 million in Los Angeles.
So do you feel like, I guess, in that, knowing that and knowing where, I guess, do you think we allowed that because we had sort of like a sense of a responsibility to the people after the after
it was a practical consideration. It's a practical consideration. You're the commander. You're the commander of American military in Korea.
Right. War
begins. Who do you evacuate? You evacuate American citizens.
Right. And the people they care about.
Well, not so much the people you care about. You have to worry about the American citizens first.
Okay.
And if your soldiers, 100 of them, 1,000 of them, 10,000 of them have, wives or husbands,
they're not going to leave them behind.
Yeah, they're not going to be very enthusiastic fighters if they don't think that their wives and families are going to be evacuated, aren't going to be evacuated.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's a very practical matter. Maybe the best thing for Latin America would be for us to declare war on Nicaragua, Salvador, Honduras, send an army down there, have lots of marriages,
take all their wives and
the war zone, and we bring them all in. That's that.
Yeah, no, that would I guess that would be a way to improve our immigration policy towards South Americans. Oh, that was great, Russell. Well, we're coming up to the end of the hour here. Russell, I've got to say it was really, really great chatting with you. I appreciated the expertise that you brought to the table. It was great getting to know you.
I found this a lot of fun.
Yeah, I hope the viewers.
I would like very much to have questions from people on anything. Chinese history. I don't care. Anything.
Yeah, definitely. I think we'll be
Relevant.
getting a lot of comments. I think we'll be getting a lot of comments and questions, and the once we get a few views going. I'll be sure and send you a link and link all of your personal information, your social media accounts, if you feel interested. I'd definitely be interested in having you come back on and giving
I would
your.
be delighted. Let me say this. Bill Clinton and I had a professor we both liked. He was a professor of history, world history.
Do you remember his name?
Oh, yes, Carroll Quigley. Carroll Quigley. Carroll. Anyway, Carroll Quigley would come in to the class, which was the amphitheater, and he would hold up the newspaper of the day, and he would say, "Okay, here are the stories of the day," and he would begin to give the historical background on all of this. We were fascinated
Yeah.
because it brought meaning to these things. He was Bill Clinton's favorite professor, and I think pretty much mine.
So you guys had the exact same professor and
Yeah,
both
we
your
were in
favorite.
the exact same class.
Wow, that's really awesome.
No, it
But
was a good class.
well, I'll have to get some more stories from you. But we're gonna go on ahead and wrap up here now.
He was a good Baptist, by the way. He never drank or smoked. And when he said that when he went to London and tried marijuana and never inhaled, it was for the simple reason that he didn't know how to inhale.
Oh man,
This is the truth.
you're gonna claim ignorance on that one.
This is the truth. This is the absolute truth. He is an honorable man.
All right. Well, on that note, we're going to go on ahead and say good evening. Thanks again, Russell, for being on. Hopefully, we'll talk to you very soon. All right.
Okay, sure.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Bye
Bye.
now.